a lot of what it's about is acknowledging or addressing your truth and having to say it out loud. And I think that running got me to a place where it was like, I have to face this, right? Like, I have to face this thing, or it doesn't matter. Like, I'm going to end up back where I started.
You are now tuning in to the Roughnecks Podcast with your host, Cole Nixon. Much love.
What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Roughnecks Podcast. We are back with another episode, and before we dive into today's episode, I just want to remind everybody that we will be having the volleyball tournament coming in July. There's more to come with that, but I'll just leave it at that for right now until we have all the details. Joining me today is a recommendation from Reno. Reno usually brings some pretty good recommendations, so I'm super excited about this one, but without further adu, Trip Ison, welcome to the Roughnecks Podcast.
Appreciate you. It's good to be here, man.
Yeah, so you played football. You were older than Reno, correct?
Yeah, so if I'm not mistaken, Reno's freshman year was my senior year, either my fourth year or my fifth year.
Okay, that's what I think that's what he said. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head, but I do know because me and Reno actually went to high school, not together. We went to the same high school. He's a little bit older than me. He played football with my brother in high school, but I've known him for quite a while, and we've definitely gotten closer over the past year. We play stand volleyball together on Sundays currently, and just stuff like that. But kind of just to kick this episode off, I wanted you to give a background on yourself. Tell the Roughnecks listeners kind of who you are, and obviously we'll dive more into it throughout the episode.
Yeah, no problem. So grew up in Roanoke, Virginia, a small town, Southwest Virginia. It's about 2 hours southwest of Richmond. Not a lot going on there other than, there's some small business, but not a lot of massive industry or anything like that. There's some schools and some colleges around that area. Virginia Tech's around there, Roanoke College. But yeah, grew up there. Fairly like normal upbringing by today's standards, meaning my parents were divorced, at a young age. My dad left when I was about 5, something like that. And it was kind of my mom and I for a long time until probably about 10 years old. And that's when my stepdad came in the picture. He's a legend, awesome dude. Still in my life today. So super grateful for him. But yeah, it was my stepdad and my mom most of my upbringing through high school. Played high school ball, obviously. And that's what got me to Kent State. Super lucky. Honestly, it still doesn't make sense how it all played out to this day, but got to Kent State, and Kent State was a whole different experience, right? And we'll dive more into all these different things, but Kent State was kind of like, for me, I think one of the biggest transitions in my life in a positive way, because coming from a small town in Virginia, going somewhere like Kent State, let's just say that culturally it's different. It's eye-opening. You can learn a lot as long as you're willing to have an open mind and pay attention to what's going on around you. So super grateful for the experience to go there. I think Kent State, and I don't think I'm that well-rounded of an individual, but if I'm well-rounded at all, it's because of Kent State. So that kind of gets us up to that point.
Yeah, I kind of want to go with the Kent State thing first. You played football at Kent State. I always like to ask guests, because I played college football. I played at the D3 level at Ohio Wesleyan, and I like to ask people kind of what their thought process was when they were going through the decision to decide where to go to play, a college sport. What was your process like deciding to go to Kent State?
So, long story short, I played offensive, defensive line in high school, and I long snapped. And the long snapping is actually what got me to Kent State. So I would go to these camps every summer. They were put on by Ray Guy, Hall of Fame punter, called Pro Snapper camps, prosnapper.com, pro kicker, pro punter. But he put on these camps and you would go compete. It was invite only. And going into my senior year, I'd have to look it up again, but it was between like 7th and 9th in the nation on accuracy and time. And so, but I never heard anything, right? I like went to camp, did what I did, performed well in season. Everything went great. Didn't hear anything, didn't know anything. Thought my football career was over, honestly, and was already looking at other options as far as I wanted to go to military college. I'd applied at Citadel, VMI. That was kind of going to be the route. And then right before that spring of my senior year, before all that took off, I got a call from Kent State, and one of my coaches pulled me out of math class, and he's like, Kent State called, and they got a preferred walk-on spot for you if you want it. And so I didn't even know where it was at. No clue. Didn't know anything about Ohio. I thought it was Kentucky, all these different things. But I remember looking it up on a school laptop after he told me, and being like, oh, it's in Ohio. Like, oh, cool. Like, they got this guy named Eugene Jarvis. Apparently he led the nation in rushing. And then, at the time, Julian Edelman wasn't Julian Edelman. But, you could read quite a bit of articles on him and his performance at that time, even during college. So I just honestly thought my career was done. Got the call. My mom found out about it before I could withhold it from her, because I really didn't want to go to college like that. Like, I didn't want to go to school like that. But she found out, and she's like, no, you got to try it. You're going. And so we flew up there, went in, met with the director of football operations. A couple of the coaches might have been in. I know one for sure. And got an invite to camp basically as a preferred walk-on for that first year, as long as everything went well academically, to get into school. Luckily, at that point in time, Kent State was taking out-of-state kids at like a 2.6. And I think I was like a 2.66. And so got in, got accepted. Really no clue what I was walking into, though, like from day one, right? No idea the difference of like fairly high level high school ball to Division I, even if it's, the MAC conference. It was still, it was a culture shock for me, for sure. Like walking in there and it's nothing but grown men. And I'd had a bunch of buddies I played with in high school go play D3. Like, I knew what they looked like. I'd competed with them. I'd been around them. And then seeing these guys, I was just like, there's a lot of guys I think that went D3 that could have played D1. Definitely could have played like special teams. Definitely could have got in on some backup roles. Probably could have started in some places. Like, you've seen it. There's D3 players out there that are outstanding. But there's like, the difference, I think, is there's like 5 or 10 guys, a core group of guys at the D1 level on each team of 105 guys that couldn't play at any other level if they wanted to, right? They had to play D1 because they're that fast, they're that strong, they're that big. So I think that was the biggest culture shock for me, was just walking in there and seeing, all the size. And then the coach said, like, the first day we were there, he's like, hey, look around the room. Everybody you see in here today was the best player at their high school. And that was also kind of like a oh shit moment, you know what I mean, to be honest. And it played out just like that. It was talent everywhere. So
Oh, I can attest to that culture shock even at the D3 level. I remember, you walk in and you're like, there's a lot of guys here, and we actually had something similar said to us one not my freshman year, but one of the years, where it's like everyone here was, the guy at their high school. Like you're now playing with better people. Like, everybody's better than you think. And, I mean, my first game and D3, I was on kickoff return, got my drop, went to go block my guy, and got put straight on my ass. And it was like, well, welcome to college football. So it is definitely awakening. I think people sometimes let their egos get in the way when they walk in, because we do come from being the best, and you think you're hot shit, and then you walk in and you kind of, once you get that wake up call, it's like, all right. Now it humbles you a little bit.
I knew first practice, dude. Like I knew right off rip. We had practice, and at that point I was just long snapping. I would transition and try to play fullback later in my college career, but at that point I was just long snapping, which was a cake. Like, special teams, I don't know if it's the same in D3, but in D1, like, practice is cake, to be honest with you. Like, you have like 3-4 periods, 6 at most, and then all the other like downtime is like you snap into a pole or kicking angles or whatever that whatever, you got time for, space for, and the rest is just kind of like throwing the football. So did all that. First practice, I'm like, oh, this is cake. This is great. And we had conditioning at the end of practice. And the conditioning test, it was like, dude, it was so simple. And it was something like, I want to say 6 half gassers and maybe some 110s. And during that conditioning session, I was placed with the combo guys. So, like, as I'm sure you know this, but for the listener, the viewer, like, you have speed guys, you have combo guys, and then you have linemen, typically, like something in that. And each of those have different time frames. I was placed with the combo guys. And before the first practice was over, I was running with the linemen. Like, the coaches said, no, like, you can go run with the linemen. There ain't no way, dude. Because I was dying. I was that far out of shape because I hadn't done anything. I was like, I'm just going to go long, snap some footballs, and that's it. But yeah, I knew right after the first practice, like, I was like, okay, this is a different game. I gotta kind of get my head out of my ass.
Kind of take me through to that mentality of being a walk-on. Did you I couldn't remember on my research, but did you end up getting a scholarship?
I did. So it took me 3.5 years, 4 years. I got a scholarship for my 5th year. Coach Hazel gave it to me. And the story behind that is kind of crazy because he called one day, which was weird. Like, I don't know what anyone else's experience was, but if the phone rings and it's your head coach, like, for me, that was never a good thing. I'd been in trouble in college a couple times. I'd gotten arrested a couple times for some drinking stuff. And I was pretty wild. Like, I was always out and about and kind of doing my thing. So I just assumed when I saw his name, I was like, he found something out, right? And he said, come to the football office, right away when you can. I need to talk to you. So I'm like sweating bullets. I'm freaking out. I'm like, man, it's my 5th year. Like, I made it this far somehow. Like, I can't believe this is about to go down. Like, I'm about to get thrown out of school, off the football team, all these things. And I walk in, and long story short, he's like, I wanted you to hear it from me, but he's like, we're going to put you on scholarship to finish this thing out. And, it was an emotional thing, man, to be honest with you. I called my mom. She was my first call, and she might have been my only call at the time, because I think at the time, my dad was in prison, so I couldn't call him. You know what I mean? If he called, I could have, answered it, collect or whatever. But she was available, obviously. So I called her, and that was emotional because for her to pay for my first 4 years of school, and a lot of people don't know this, especially out of state. She had a full-time job, obviously, but she got real big into eBay. And I didn't realize how serious it was until I went home for a Christmas break one time and went to my bedroom. My bedroom was gone. It was nothing but eBay stuff. So basically, she was going to these department stores and buying what she could and flipping it, and then taking that money and doing it again and again and again. And that's how she was paying for my school. So she was a hustler. I mean, I get a lot of who I am today from her, for sure. But being able to call her and say, hey, I know it took me a while, but you don't got to pay for this last bit. She was, it was an emotional moment, so.
That's definitely a cool moment. And especially, you almost feel like you're able to take a weight off your parents' shoulders when you do something like that, because I feel like you don't realize the type of weights that parents hold until you start to get older, and then you kind of start to see like all the things that they truly did for you. Like, oh, there's plenty of times when we're younger we despise them, and sometimes we may even say we hate them, and don't like their decisions and how they want us the road they want us to take. But then as we get older, we're thankful and grateful for it, and that's definitely a cool thing to be able to kind of take that off of her shoulders a little bit.
Yeah, it was a special thing. I think up into that point, like, I knew she was proud of me, but I'd let her down quite a few times, right? Like, my first semester of college, there was, I think, 25 in my class, including scholarship players. And I want to say like 18 or 20 of us were on academic probation. It was something ridiculous. And my GPA in my first semester was a 0.77. And I remember her calling and being like, you can just come home. You don't, if you don't want to be there, you don't want to do it, like, come home. And I was like, no, I'll get it together. I'd struggled in the classroom back and forth because I was lazy. And I got in trouble for, like I said, drinking and being out too late and spending too much money, all these different things. So to be able to give her one good thing was important, and that felt good for sure.
But I kind of want to go into your whole story a little bit further too, because you went down this path, and then you now are on the sobriety, and you have ran the Ironman and done all these races. You have your podcast as well. Kind of just take me through the story from post college until now.
Yeah, what a ride, right? Oh boy, let's see. So to take it a step back too, I started partying like 8th, 9th grade, and I partied all through high school. Never really saw an issue with it. Everyone around me was doing it. Same in college, widely accepted. I can honestly tell you I was on the far end of that spectrum though. Like I was definitely getting it in on a regular basis, right? It wasn't just like a weekend here and there. It was every weekend and a couple times during the week. But like I had football and structure to keep me in line, if you will. And I think that I took that for granted, right? When I got done playing ball and went back home, I kept partying the exact same way. So now I had a paycheck and, I had a job, but it was, that job itself, like I didn't feel like it was as demanding as football. I felt like football was much more demanding, especially physically. So, I kind of that's kind of when the process started to get a little bit dark, honestly, is when I got done with football, because it was my identity, right? That's how I introduced myself, all the way from the time I was a little one. Like they'd be like, "Oh, this is Trip." And they'd be like, "Oh, he's a big boy. Does he play football?" All the way through college, where it's like, "Oh, he plays at Kent State." Like that's how people would introduce me. And I got addicted to that attention, man, to be honest with you. Like it felt good. And once that went away, then I was just the former football player. And anybody who's, you can attest to this too. That lifestyle is totally different. Active football player to former football player, like how people treat you, how people communicate with you, all those things, like it changes drastically. So I got super lost in that. Like I didn't know who I was, what I wanted to do. I knew that, my degree was in education, didn't want to be a teacher. I minored in justice studies, didn't want to be a cop. So I had no clue what to do. I kind of went to work for my parents for a couple of years there after college. And all I really did was work and party and lift weights. And, I didn't get super heavy during that time. And I think like solely that's because on Sundays I would go to my mom's house and she'd prep my food for the week. So like I was spoiled rotten in that regard. Like I was eating, grilled chicken and trail mix and like broccoli. Like I had no choice. And then from that point, I got offered a job in Florida, and I was like, okay, this is my chance to get out. Like I don't want to be in my hometown anymore. I feel like there's the world's a bigger place. I got to go check it out. I got to go see it. So I went to Florida, and that was the first time in my life I think that I was truly on my own in a lot of ways. In college, high school, obviously, all the way through high school, I had my parents. College, I had my roommates, my boys, my teammates, girlfriends, like close support systems nearby that kind of kept me in check and made sure I didn't go too far off the rails or whatever. And then when I got back home, my family was still close. And I even got in trouble at home those 2 years too. I got a boating under the influence on Smith Mountain Lake, which is a lake there in Virginia. And then I got a disorderly conduct downtown at a bar, but like should have had a lot more than that, right? And got lucky and no clue why. But go to Florida, the partying keeps going. There's no one to keep me in check. And I'm kind of like off the rails at that point. I got a little bit ahead of myself there. So it was pretty much all drinking until that last year I was home. And there was at that time, a lot of cocaine around. And I was terrified of it. I was convinced, like, I'm going to be the guy that tries it and dies. Like, that'll be me. And always been a hypochondriac in that regard. But one night was so drunk, I had this thing where I would like slide across the table and move it off the table while I was like snorting, and it looked like I did the line. While I was so drunk one night, I actually did the line. And I remember that feeling vividly, and it was kind of like the best I'd ever felt in my life. And I catch a lot of heat for saying that, but like the shit's true. Like I never felt more free than that first line. And at that point in my life. And that's an intoxicating feeling, no pun intended. It's like, oh my God, I just want to do more of that. I want to feel that. And that, that continued into Florida. When I was in Florida, that's when I probably, I could get my hands on it a lot easier. I was drinking probably 3-4 nights a week and doing coke once or twice a week at that point when I was drinking. And, kind of stayed in that same role or similar role and relocated like further south in Florida to Fort Lauderdale, Miami. And like, God knows the party wasn't going to slow down there. It only picked up and got crazier as far as like the drug and alcohol scene. At that point in time too, like I got super into, like I got addicted to the dopamine hit or the attention at strip clubs. So I was drinking, doing coke, and in the strip club every single weekend. And that's a dark place to be. Like, and it, right? I knew it when I was in it. Like, I had some good times for sure, but I knew it was dark. And I kind of burnt that out, right? Like I did a lot of damage in South Florida, and a bunch of shots across the bow. Again, like should have gotten in trouble so many times and didn't somehow. And I had an opportunity after that to go to another project, same company in Austin, Texas. And this is where things started to shift, and I didn't really know it yet, but they were shifting for sure. I was dating a girl at the time. She moved out here with me. And let's just say, out of respect for her, like, we weren't helping each other out, right? Like our habits weren't supportive of one another. So that was kind of rough. And that went on for like a year and a half of kind of living that lifestyle, still partying all the time, working full time, and then having this type of relationship at home. And, I got through professionally. Like, we had a lot of success. We did a lot of great things, but like I wasn't even touching the surface of what was possible because, I was 50% Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, about 75%, Thursday and Friday, I'd be rocking like 100%, and then start all over on Monday. Right. And so, there were some challenges, but Austin was the first place that I was exposed to any type of recovery or sobriety community, like even like started to put that together, what that was. Is the first place I was exposed to like endurance sports. I had a boss, a coworker, still one of my best friends to this day. He kind of opened my eyes to it. I didn't do any of that stuff then, but like he was doing like half Ironmans, and he went and did a Lake Placid Ironman, and he was running like these different races, and I just made fun of him. I thought he was crazy as hell. I'm like, what a loser, right? Like, that's what you got time to do. Little did I know, but we left there, went to Atlanta. Same trend continues. The weight keeps stacking on. I finished college ball at like 230, and I got down to about 215 within that first year after college ball being home. But from that year until 2020, so that'd have been 7 years, I got up to 312. And when I was there in Atlanta at that other job, I was heavy, man. I mean, I remember like being out of breath all the time. I remember like, honestly, just like physically, emotionally, mentally, all of it, spiritually, just feeling like trash all the time. And my escape to that was, to get fucked up. It was to drink, to do dope, to hang out with, women I shouldn't be hanging out with. Anything I could do to feel better, I was doing it. And, you know, I tried to quit drinking because at this point, like, I didn't have no money left. Like, I was working full time, making good money, but I was so far in debt. Like, every check I got went instantly to paying a minimum on a credit card somewhere. And so there was no money left. And I didn't have rent. Like, the company paid for my truck. Nothing. Like, I didn't have any bills really. Everything was just credit card related. So, you know, I got to a point where I tried to quit a few different times because I knew, like, every time I went out, I was spending $1,000. And, like, alcohol was a small spend. Drugs were a small spend. But, like, I was throwing ridiculous amount of money in a strip club. And that, you know, obviously adds up over time. And so I tried to quit because I'm like, well, I can't keep doing this. There's no money left. You know, and I'm just digging a deeper and deeper hole, and I couldn't quit, man. And this would have been like probably 4 or 5 months, 3 to 4 months before I got sober. So March of 2020, COVID hits, and I'm in the midst of all this. COVID hits, Atlanta, nothing's happening. Like, Atlanta's dead. And I start having like my first round of significant like suicidal thoughts. Like, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't think anyone's going to miss me. My family would be better off without me. Like, I'm, you know, people are placing judgment on them, and I'm bringing shame to them. And, you know, all these thoughts of failure and just giving up kind of played on this Rolodex in my head. And so I was trying to get sober. I was trying to stop drinking. It wasn't clicking. I'd go, you know, 7 days, 10 days. I'd feel great. And I'd be like, all right, I got it under control now. And then I would drink and then be just as gone, if not further gone, you know. And my drinking at that point wasn't like drink for a few hours, blackout, pass out. It was like start drinking Friday, finish Sunday night. Like, it was that kind of drinking. So that was probably the roughest stretch, I think, was that March 2020 to July 2020, where it was a mental low. It's the darkest place I've ever been in my life. And like today, when I look back at that time frame, though, it's the best thing that ever happened to me. That dark place prepared me for everything that's happening now in my life. Like, nothing can compare to that, right? That I've experienced. So it's like when something happens throughout the course of the day, I'm like, who gives a shit? Like, that, it ain't that, right? I can overcome this. I can do this, but like, I ain't got to feel that. And so either way, July 2020, a couple of my college teammates actually were in town. They came down to Atlanta to see me for my birthday, and they knew I was having problems. And, you know, I'd promised them like, no, I'm good, man. I got it under control now, whatever. And I was lying. And we went and played golf that day. I drank a bunch of beer, and we got back that night, and I was trying to get Coke, and I couldn't get it. And, you know, I called everywhere. And like at this time, especially during COVID, like, bro, you could get dope 24/7, especially in Atlanta. It was damn near on delivery. And like, you know, the same cars rolling through the apartment complex without a pizza sign on top. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was obvious what was going down. But I couldn't find any. And it was a Friday night, and I'm like, and this is crazy. So I'm like, what am I going to do? Like, I feel horrible. I got to get up. You know, I'm feeling bottom of the barrel. I'm having these dark thoughts, all these things. And I'll never forget, like, so my birthday was July 19th, and this was July 18th. And it was like 11:55 at night, something like that, 11:50. And I looked at the clock, and I was just like, man, like, here comes another birthday. I'm turning 30 this year. Like, this is my life kind of thing. And I got up and went in the bathroom and looked in the mirror, probably for the first time ever, you know, really looked in the mirror. And not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually, was like disgusted. I was like, oh, this is who I am now. You know, this is what I've worked myself into. This is who I've become. And I had to make a choice, man. It was like, I know what happens if I keep going, right? Like, if I keep drinking, doing drugs, doing what I was doing, like, I was going to be dead sooner. Whether it be from the drugs and alcohol or like me, you know, taking my own life. So it was that, or it was like, fight like hell and just see what happens. Right. And I don't know, it was one of those moments like in life that you never forget. But I walked back out, I sat down on the couch. It was like 11:58 now. Birthday's at midnight. And I had a beer in front of me and I was like, all right, I'm going to chug this beer and I'm done. Like that's in my head what was going on. So I chugged this beer, I set it down, and I just told God, I said, I'm ready if you're ready. And that's all I said. And I walked into the kitchen, told my buddies, my teammates, was like, hey, I'm done. I'm done drinking. That was it for me. I love y'all, whatever. There was no judgment. They said, cool, man. We're proud of you. We're happy for you. I went to bed and woke up the next morning. That was day one, July 19th, 2020. And going back to the ego thing, like former college football player, right? Like I can go run today. I can go do whatever I need to do. Well, I was 312 and I'd been smoking cigarettes and drinking like a fish and doing cocaine for 7 years at this point or whatever it was. Like my college conditioning was no longer present. So I convinced myself, I was like, well, I'm just gonna go run a mile. And I put on my shoes and I went outside and it was hot as hell. I'll never forget, like July in Atlanta, go figure. I probably could have put that together, but it was hot as hell. And I think I ran like a quarter mile and started walking. And I was like, nope, got to keep running, and started walking again. And it took me like 16 some minutes. I still have the data saved on my phone. And I go back to it from time to time, when I need a little kick in the ass, check that thing out. And so, yeah, that was day one. And, during COVID, the benefit was like in-person stuff was limited, but you could go to a lot of different support groups, if you will, via Zoom. And I say the same thing on my podcast is if anyone, is curious about what I did specifically, like get in touch with me. I'll tell you everything as far as like, support groups or recovery, like that specific piece, but out of anonymity for that organization or those organizations, like I don't speak on it publicly, but if anybody reaches out, I'm more than willing to point them in that direction. So that kind of kicked it off though. I was running every day. I was like, I'm gonna run a mile every day for 30 days. That's step one. Step two, I'm gonna eat healthy for the next 30 days. Step three, I'm gonna attend 3 of these Zoom meetings a day, like aggressively. And those were my commitments. I didn't even, honestly, like really didn't even commit to not drinking because like in my brain, when I said, I'm ready if you're ready, like that was back there. That was yesterday. Like today, this is what the path looks like. And I think sometimes in sobriety and recovery, people get so focused on not doing the thing that it drives them crazy and they end up doing the thing versus picking 10 things that will keep you away from that one thing and just focusing on those 10, right? Because I think fresh into it, like, man, if day one I woke up and was like, I can never drink or do dope again or chase women like that, I'd have went crazy, dude, because I would have been like, I don't know how to live. Like, that's how I live. So I think that's an important part of recovery too, is being able to focus on things that keep you away from that thing and put you in a more positive direction. So for me, that was exercise, running a mile a day, eating healthy, and going to 3 Zoom meetings a day. And within 90 days of that, the first 30 days get by, I get through those, and I've lost like, 20 pounds, something like that, something ridiculous, like weight's like melting off of me. And I'm like, holy shit, like, okay. And I'm still only running like a mile because, like, dude, I'm telling you, my body, I get it when people say like, oh, I can't run, man. My knees, my joints, everything's bad from sports. Like, I get it. I hear you. And I felt it that first month bad. And feet felt broken, all kinds of stuff. But that's all I knew, right? I just knew if I did that thing that day, I wasn't going to fuck up. And so I held on to that dearly. And that got me through the first 30 days. And then after 30 days, I was like, well, shit, might as well keep going, see what happens. And so I kept going, man. And within 90 days, dude, I got 90 days. It seemed like that. And I mean, some days were long. Don't get me wrong. It wasn't cakewalk, but it went by fast looking back at it. And within that 90 days, I quit my career, quit my job, decided I was going to move back to Austin, Texas, give that a shot. I didn't know what I was going to do exactly. I figured it'd be something in construction, but I honestly didn't really care. I was like, I'll work at Pizza Hut. Like, I don't care. I'm good with that. I'm good with making pizza, flipping burgers, like pumping gas, whatever it is. I want to be there. And the programs I was doing virtually were based there. So it was like everything was pulling me back there anyway. And so I told my good buddy I mentioned earlier in the show, Will, who was my coworker, and for all intents and purposes, he was my boss. But don't tell him I said that. I still won't admit that to him ever. But I told him, I sat him down and said, hey, this is what it is. And, his feedback in that moment was kind of like, go for it, buddy. Like, I'm behind you. He could have, the situation we were in professionally, like he could have easily scratched and clawed and been like, no, you can't do that to me. That's screwing me over. That's so wrong. He didn't do any of that, man. He's like, you got to go. If you feel it pulling at your heart, you got to go. So he supported it. I ended up moving back to Austin, and there was a transition period there where I was flying back and forth from Austin to Atlanta, which was tough for me, bro, because I don't know if Reno told you the story, but I grew up flying all the time. Never really liked it on airplanes, never really enjoyed it. And in college, my senior year, we were coming back from a game and we took off, and like the plane dropped, dude. Like the lights went out, like exit rows lit up, power went out. It seemed like the plane dropped. I remember like the kicker I always talk about, but Freddie Cortez was eating flaming hot Cheetos, and like those were in the air. And I heard there was shit flying. So I thought I was dying. So I didn't fly for a while after that. And the bowl game, actually, I got off the airplane on the tarmac and at Akron Canton, off the charter jet on the tarmac, walked like literally at the airport, walked across the tarmac out the gates to where the taxis are at in the front, got a taxi back to Kent State, got my truck and drove to Mobile, Alabama for the bowl game. So I didn't fly for a while, dude. I was scarred. But when I was drinking and partying, I figured out I loved to fly when I was hammered. And so when I was going through this transition period, when I just got sober, back and forth between Austin and Atlanta, I had to fly, but I had to do it sober. And dude, that was a trip for me. Like I struggled with it. I mean, you talk about like white knuckling it like the whole time, multiple directions. It was rough. But it was good too, because it like gave me some purpose, like while I was transitioning to like not just be there by myself alone, not having anything to do. So it gave me some time to like put some things in motion. But God works in crazy ways, man. Like that whole experience. So when I was in Austin the first time, I lived in an apartment complex with that girl I told you about in that relationship. And we lived in unit B129. And I promise this will all make sense in a minute, but I go to Atlanta. And when I figure out I'm going to quit my job, I call this apartment finder and I'm like, hey, see if there's any units, available at this apartment complex. And it's a massive one in Austin. It's a huge apartment complex. Well, she gets over there and calls me back, and I'm like, so-and-so's here. She's talking about the building manager. And I was like, yeah, ask him, this is what I'm looking for, and see if he's got anything available. And he's like, oh, we don't have anything like that, man. Like, it's going to be a long time before everything like that. So I was kind of let down, and I was joking. And I was like, well, let me know when you get one like B129 available. And he's like, that one's available right now, and free first month's rent, no security deposit. And I was like, that's God. So I just said, hey, go ahead and send me that lease. I'm signing it right now. And I did, and moved back into the same apartment, bro. Like the exact same apartment a year and a half later that I'd left, but I moved back into it sober, which was a crazy experience in itself. And I'd met this guy who was basically like willing to pay me under the table to come do some construction work with him. And so I jumped on that while I figured out what I wanted to do long term, and was working with him one day and fell off a deck, fell like 14 feet and landed on concrete, and the like on the corner of a step too. But like cracked my hip, broke a few ribs, did some like pretty gnarly damage. And so now I'm like, oh my God, I have no health insurance because that's expired. So I can't even get like all the proper scans. That like I'm leaving the ER while he's telling me like, you don't have health insurance, but if you pee blood, you got to come back. You know, all these crazy things. And I'm freaking out though. I get back to my apartment. I have no job. I can't walk. They're telling me for 8 weeks. They're telling me, you know, that basically I need to be immobile, and I'm freshly sober, newly sober. You know, at this point, fortunately, at this point, I guess I was about 5 months sober, but still very much just figuring it out. Like I was in a massive haze, and yeah, it was rough. I'll be real about it. It was rough. Not knowing what I was going to do, you know, if I'd made the wrong decision, if I'd screwed up, if I should have stayed in Atlanta, you know, and not knowing, but just kept praying, man, kept doing the right things. And I think like day 4 after that injury, I reached out to, and we'll cut it out if we have to, but I reached out to Trent Stratton. Trent was the athletic trainer at Kent State. And I told him what was going on. And I was like, I gave him the whole story. I was like, I'm going to go crazy if I have to sit still right now. I can't deal with it much longer. And he basically told me, he's like, go get on the stationary bike in your apartment. And he's like, ride it as long as you can, then go home and go back and do it again the next day. And then the next day. And then the next day. And so that was huge for me because it was someone I trusted. And I think he trusted me enough to be like, hey, go do this without, completely destroying myself. But yeah, that's how I recovered and rehabbed it. I did it on a stationary bike, and 20 minutes turned into 30 turned into an hour turned into 2 hours. And then at this point, the running before the injury, I'd done a couple of long distances even in Atlanta. Like I'd worked up to a half marathon by myself, and 270 pounds. Could I go out and hit a half marathon? It was slow, but like could do the distance. And so I woke up one day, it's probably 30 days after the fall, and was like, all right, I'm going to go run a mile today. Like I'm going to do it. And I ran a 5K. And I was like, okay, we're back. Like we're back. And so that motivation train that started rolling again. Day 60, I did another half marathon. So in 60 days, cracked hip, broken ribs, like half marathon. Right. And that's God, that's, to me, that's what it is. And being dedicated to the right things. And I just kept praying and kept trying. And it was also during this time that I'd worked out a deal to start a business here in Austin, a construction consultation company, which we still have today. And, wasn't getting any work, but like we had a business, you know what I mean? It was like, there was no money coming in. We had a business. And I cashed out my 401k, man, to pay off some debt before I moved. Still had a massive amount of debt. And I gave a large portion of that money to, a close family member of mine who I felt like it was the least I could do after all I'd put him through. So I had no money, right? And paying rent on credit cards, it's a disaster at this point. And that carries me. So 60 days is into February, right? 60 days after the injury. So February would have been 7 months over. And Austin has this freeze, which was crazy. Like 5 to 7 days, no power throughout the whole city. Everyone's freaking out. Dude, I just spent 5 years in Ohio. I'm like, we're fine. Like we're going to be good. Like y'all got to chill. Everything's fine. But people were losing it. And I get it. Like the infrastructure's not here. So this freeze happens. I got no power. I'm still trying to grind, right? Like I'm going to figure this out. And a buddy of mine got power back and he told me to come, take a shower, warm up kind of thing. Because it was cold as hell. It was me and my dog Tex. And we were just cuddled up. And so I went over to my buddy's house, took a shower, and he had YouTube on TV. And I was watching, and there was this dude yoked out of his mind. And he's like training for an Ironman. And dude, I don't know what it is about being early in sobriety, but you almost got like, and maybe it's the former athlete thing. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's an ego issue. Maybe it's narcissism. I can't tell you. it's something, but I'm watching this yoke dude do this Ironman, and I'm like, I could fucking do that. I could do that. I could do an Ironman. This is 7 months sober. I'm still 260, right? Like I ain't in shape. I'm breaking my body to run 5 miles, 7 miles, whatever. And but in my brain, I'm like, I can do it. And he had this coach on the YouTube channel, and I start talking to my buddy, and he's like, oh, she actually coaches me too. You know, if you want to do it, she probably has an assistant coach or somebody like that you could work with. And I just cold DM'd her, and was like, hey, this is my story. I want to do that. I'll pay whatever. Didn't have any money, mind you, but I was like, I'll pay whatever. Like, I don't care. Just felt like what I was supposed to do. And so started working with her, bought a bike in the month of March, which was ridiculous, right? Like I bought bikes. Tri-bikes are expensive. I think I spent like $5,000 that day of money I didn't have. Like it was a straight credit card. But it was, looking back, it was nuts, right? And like people around me were like, dude, you've lost your mind, right? You're dumping all your money into this Ironman thing and you don't have any. Like you're crazy. Like you have no self-control. Just like I'm getting beat from every angle. By pretty much everybody but my mom, financially. She's like, nope, if you feel like you got to do it, you got to go for it. Like she didn't care as long as I wasn't drinking, doing dope. You know what I mean? She's like, run yourself as deep a debt you want to run. So still no business training for this Ironman. The Ironman comes up in October. So I trained from basically March until October. So, 6 solid months to do this Ironman. And by this point, I'm 207. And so I'd lost 105 pounds. And at that point, the best shape I'd been in maybe ever. And I'm coming up, I'm a year and 3 months sober. Like I'm high on the hog, dude. But no business, no money coming in. So I'm really sweating that. Like I'm freaking out. So we go to this Ironman, do a full distance. First, like didn't do a half or anything like that. I was like, I just want to do a full, go do the full, finish it, by the grace of God. And that was on a Sunday. On a Monday morning, we got a call from a GC in San Antonio. It was like, hey, we want you down here to start working. And my phone hadn't rang the whole time, right? For 10 months, not one call. But I do the Ironman, my phone rings, right? And people think it's crazy and call it whatever they want. It's God to me. I don't care. But phone rings. And I'm like, well, I got to go to San Antonio. I guess we're going to do this job. So it's supposed to be 30 days, end up being there for like almost a year. And basically reversed the debt, right? Like all of it. Sold the bike almost immediately though, because I was like, okay, we got, this isn't a need. I've done an Ironman now. I don't really need this freaking rocket shit pencil bike anymore that I'm never going to ride again. So, but I sold that and, was working in San Antonio, and I think the fitness kind of took a back seat during a lot of that, to be honest with you. Like I was working like a dog. I came from the construction industry. I love it. I love the grind of it. It's a grimy world. But I love that. I mean, it reminds me of football, and like, your team reminds me of your football team and the locker room and all these things. And so I can get off deep into that, but long story short, we're down there almost a year, reverse the debt. Well, probably like 9 months into that year, this dude, the superintendent, walks up to me in the office one day and he grabs me by my love handle and he's like, dang, dude, like, where'd this come from? And that was an ego hit for me, bro, because I went from 312 to 207. Now I'm back at like 230, right? I put some weight back on because I wasn't training for an Ironman. And it clicked for me. And I was like, nope, I got to go back to day one mentally. That was the first time where I was like, I don't have to relapse to go back to day one, but I can make the conscious decision to go back and get that same drive. Like, I'm going to go get it. So that's what I did. I came home. And I was like, I'm going to figure this out. Well, the same dude, Nick Bear, that I saw doing the Ironman, had a new YouTube series out, and he was training for an ultra marathon. It was a 100-miler, Rocky Raccoon. I was like, well, shit, I can do that. Same thing. I will tell the whole world, though, 100-miler is a lot different than an Ironman. But that was my moment. That was my day one again. And I started training for an ultra. I hired a coach again, was working, full time and training for an ultra for that last 3 months of that contract, and kind of, dove off into that world, just running. And I really, I think the deepest reason I got into the ultra thing is because I think when I thought back to the Ironman, I was like, okay, what was the hardest part of that for me? Right. Well, it was the run. Well, no shit, right? Because like it's last, and it's going to be the hardest because it's at the end. And, but I remember thinking like, if I can swim 2.4 miles and bike, 112 and then run a full marathon, I know I can run further than a full marathon. Right. Because like I just did all these other things. And that the Ironman was my first time ever running a marathon. I'd never ran a marathon prior to the Ironman. So that was nuts in itself. But either way, start training for this ultra. And running for me has been a love-hate relationship. For the longest time, I did it to punish myself, man, and had a really negative relationship with it because growing up, running was punishment. If you had to run lines or extra gassers or whatever, it was punishments because you fucked up. And so rewiring that in my brain of like, no, I want to go run. I get to go run. That took a lot of time for me. And it was almost like that first year of running was me just punishing myself. It was like, no, you're going to pay for all the shit you did. And, but slowly but surely, as I start training for this ultra, I start to enjoy it. Then I start to look forward to it. And, I went probably 6 weeks before the race. I had a 40-mile training run. My weekly volume at that point was like 70 to 85 miles, something like that. But I went out and did a 40-mile training run and fucked my leg and my hip up like bad. Probably like mile 35. And I was like, well, shit, 5 more miles. Like I can crawl that. Finish it, the 40, and my body's destroyed. And so I spent the next like 6 weeks before the race doing like physical therapy. I mean, I was doing like fat fill work. I was doing anything you can imagine: dry needling, electro needling, compression, cryo, sauna. Like, I mean, dude, there was no limit. And, was able to start the race feeling, decent, right? Was able to get to a place where I felt decent, but I hadn't ran really that last 6 weeks because I was just trying to get healthy. And so, that was my first attempt at a 100-miler, made it 60 miles, and it broke me off something dirty, dude. It probably took me 2 weeks after that race to like become functional as a human. You know what I mean? Like mentally, emotionally, physically, like it broke me. And initial response right after the race was like, well, I'll never do that shit again. That was stupid. That was horrible. That was the worst. Like, I can't believe I would ever do something like that. I'm like, what an idiot. And it didn't take long before I was like, you know what? Like, fuck the race. I love the process. I need the process. And that's been huge for me in my recovery, is having a process, a regimen. And running being a part of that regiment's become super, super important for me. So I was like, okay, well, it kicks your ass once, you got to go back. You got to keep fighting. And at this point, like, I've been pretty open about my sobriety on social media. And, I was like, well, I can't quit, right? Like, that's the one thing I cannot do is quit, because there's people that maybe one person is looking to me for inspiration. And if it's just one, like, by God, I better die doing something else, because I got to keep fighting. So signed up for it again, same race, trained for it, got through the training block pretty healthy. But shit happens in a 100-miler. Like, go out, run the race, it floods the night before. I do like this weird split, pull a groin. Next thing you know, I'm hobbling. And then it became like a battle of, I got to get further than I got last year. And so basically hobbled it out for, I got hurt around the marathon marks of 25, 26 miles, and I hobbled it out for the next 40. to beat the previous year. And same thing, swore, I'm done with that shit. Like, that's ignorant. Like, why would I ever put myself through that? I don't need that. You know what I mean? All these different thoughts. And the turnaround time got even quicker, right? It was like, okay, I know I can do this. Like, it mentally, I know I can do it. And it's sometimes in life, like, that's what it's about. You just got to keep showing up. You don't have to be perfect, but you just got to keep showing up. And my recoveries looked a lot like that. It by all standards and by the book, like, I didn't really follow many of the rules. They say don't make any drastic life changes the first, year of sobriety. I said, fuck that. 90 days, I moved across the country, quit my job, like, didn't care, right? I was like, I'd surrendered to something bigger than me, man. I'd surrendered to God, and I was just kind of like, you know what? Like, if it feels right, that's you talking to me. I'm going to trust in it. I'm going to roll. And that's what's gotten me here, man. Like, and I want to make sure I give credit where credit's due. Like, glory to God, because I'm not, people probably think that's weird coming from a guy that's saying fuck and shit and all these words. But, like, for me, that's my relationship, man. And more power to anyone who has their own relationship with their higher power. It doesn't have to be God. It can be whatever it is, man. More power to you. But for me, it's God, and our relationship looks like that. And we have some pretty rough conversations, and it's only possible because I think I removed the belief in myself and put it in him. Right. I removed, like, my own ego and said, like, this ain't about me. I'm not doing it for me anymore. Like, I want to be of service to others that are struggling. And I feel like that's my God-given purpose. And so I kind of went all in on that. And then September of this past year, I think that, like, the nail, no pun intended either, but the nail in the coffin got put in all this, because that I had to burn the bridges, man, and go all in on it. And this is what kicked the podcast off. This is what got everything rolling. And when I really went all in. But September, I got a call that my biological father had passed away. They found him in his apartment. And, they assumed heart attack. And, a couple months went by before the final death certificates came out. And it came out that he died of a cocaine overdose. And, bro, and I have the death certificate, and, like, we have the same name. I'm the third, he's the junior. And it was like reading my own shit. And it was like, fuck. Like, and I had no clue he was struggling with that. Like, I'd talk to him about my sobriety, what I was doing. He knew he got to come to my Iron Man. He knew about 1 year sober, 2 years sober, 3 years sober, all these things. But the dude never opened up to me and said, hey, I'm fucking struggling. Right. Because he was afraid of, like, judgment or someone else's perception or all this other shit. And so I knew that the second I read that, I knew two things. One, my fucking death certificate ain't going to say that shit. I don't know what it's going to say. It's going to say some wild shit probably, right? And I'm good with that. But it ain't going to say that. And two, I'm going to talk about this till I'm blue in the face, regardless of who it offends, because there are people out there today that are going to die today because they can't open up and ask for help, because of the fear of shame or judgment. And then you got people that are actively doing it and think it's funny. Like, it's a form of bullying. And it's crazy to me, man. But it's like, that's my whole thing now is fuck the stigma. Like, whatever the stigma is, fuck it. Like, it ain't happening no more. I'll fight it until the day I die. And so Ain't Dead Yet really took off out of that and was like, okay, we're going to do a podcast. And episode 1, I'm going to tell my whole story in true color, all the details. And, and bring guests in that have been through similar things. And it doesn't even have to be drugs or alcohol, dude. It could be food. It could be sex. It could be gambling. It could be childhood, physical, emotional, sexual abuse. I mean, dude, trauma doesn't stop, right? Like, you don't, like, trauma can happen outside of your childhood. It does not stop. But everyone out here is going through some form of it actively, right? They're dealing with some shit. And for me, it's like, well, just talk about it. Like, who cares? Right? Because once you realize that everyone's going through shit, like, I don't know. For me, it's like, what's the point of hiding from it? Right? So, like, when I told my story on the podcast, it was like, the whole Goggins thing, like, here's my billboard, like, judge me. This is who I am. This is all the bad shit I've done. This is who I want to be. This is the path I'm trying to create. And this is me. This is my life. So, judge away. But I think we've got to get to a place where more people are open and willing to do that, right? And willing to step out on a limb and say, like, yeah, I've done cocaine in strip clubs with 4 strippers and that drank with the best of them. And, I smoked crack in Nashville and, snorted meth one time in Atlanta because I thought it was coke. Like, you got to have people that say that shit, because like people out there are sitting at home in their own head thinking like, oh my God, like, I went too far now. I just did this, or I just did that. And like, this is, and they just they stay in their head because they don't want to talk about it and because they think no one else is going through it. But so many people are struggling. Just not a lot of people willing to talk about it. So I'm trying to create a culture where it's okay to talk about these things. But yeah, that's the story from college basically till now. And there's a million things in between, but I tried to give it the best rundown I could, man.
Yeah, it's definitely one hell of a story. And what I like about it a lot is, a lot of people think that there's a straight path to get to the end goal, but it's not. Like, I mean, it's a bunch of hills and valleys. And if you're not, you have to go up and down. You have to have those hard times. And one of the things that you said too that I really liked is when you were talking about the, somebody always thinks that they have it worse. And you were talking about how, like, well, it's not this. It's not, what it was. And that's the thing is everybody, people say to you, somebody's got it worse than you. Sometimes we had it worse than what we have right now. And if we look at it in that perspective, sometimes it's like, it kind of gives you a little bit of that, that boost that you might need of like, all right, you talked about going back and sometimes you'll go look at, that first run, the first mile you did. And it gives you that little boost of like, I was here, but now I'm here. So like, why am I complaining? Like, there's no reason to complain now because I've made it so far. But I kind of want to go back a little bit too, all the way back to the beginning, because with the college thing, I think college it is wildly accepted in college, to drink as much as you want, to party as much as you want, do whatever you want. It's like the rule. I mean, you get out of high school, you don't have your parents on you anymore. You kind of feel like you're free and don't have any rules. And I was the same way with post college. It's like I was still partying like I was in college. And it kind of takes a while. Luckily, I had a boss that was very generous with me and worked with me because I was late pretty much damn near every day for like almost a year after college when I went back and worked for him after college. And luckily he's, he knows what I'm going through and they knew it. And like, we didn't actually talk about it until like after the fact, but it's one of those things that after college, you get that paycheck and you can afford to drink more now. And it's just wildly accepted. And I wish it wasn't. I understand why, I'm not saying don't go out and have fun in college, but you have to realize after college, you kind of got to take a step back. And it's, especially as an athlete, like you talked about the athlete identity. How do you think people come out of college and try to find their identity after college? What do you think is like one of the best ways for people to go about that?
Not my way. No, in all seriousness, I think it's tough, right? And the reason I say that is like alcohol creates an alter ego. And when you're used to living in that alter ego, even without sport, you can still get to that place almost. And so, for me, it was like finding a way to be in that place after college. So that's the biggest thing that kept me drinking like that, I think. But the best advice I could give for somebody getting out of school or out of athletics and transitioning to, a different identity or finding their identity, start running. Like, I know it sounds crazy and people are like, well, fuck running. The only time I run is if I'm being chased by a dog, whatever. But like, dude, the best thing that has ever happened to me was to start running. And you don't have to run a lot. You don't have to run far. Just do what you can. And I think you find your identity in dark places. And unfortunately, you can get to a dark place two different ways, right? And one of them is through like repetitive action of bad decisions, right? And that's where I got to. I got to that dark place, and it took that to create change. But I'm a big believer in you can create darkness. And one of the ways to create darkness is to push yourself physically. And in those moments, you find out who you are or what's important to you or what matters. And I think through that, you can find identity. But, you know, there's a lot of mixed opinions on that. You know, there's plenty of people, man, that went to school, played athletics, got out of school, never had to experience anything dark, and are wildly successful. Put the drink down right away and like created a beautiful life. And what I have to say to that is like more power to them. That wasn't my story. And I know that's it's not a lot of people's story. And it's a tricky thing to kind of navigate. But, you know, when someone reaches out now, like to put it bluntly, and you know, whether it's a DM or a text and says, "Hey man, I'm struggling. Like, what do I do? You know, what should I do?" Dude, I tell them go run. Like, go run. And people say, "Well, you're just running from your problems." Maybe the first couple of days, maybe that's what you need. Maybe you need some distance from them so you can see them for what the fuck they are. Right. And that's how I feel about it. But I tell people, like, if it's finding identity, purpose, whatever it is, like, create your own darkness in an acute fashion so that you don't have to create it over a long term with bad decisions. Because creating it in an acute fashion, like, I can recover from a 100-mile ultra marathon a million times faster than if I were to go back out and drink today and get all fucked up and blow all my finances and lose my house and friends and family. Like, I can't bounce back from that in 2 weeks. So if I get to a place where I'm lost, or I feel like I need a sense of direction, running gives me that, because it creates a darkness for me where I find out what I really am, what I'm made of, what's important to me. So, you know, that would be my advice for anyone struggling. You know, put your shoes on and go run.
I can attest to, I mean, I don't know if you've ever had a similar experience, but you know, going through, you know, the struggles of post college, and just, you know, finally getting a workout in, or finally going for a run, or getting on the bike and riding, doing some type of physical activity. I remember one time I was running and just stopped and screamed. And it was like, kind of like you said, you know, maybe you need to get some distance from those problems so you can see what the hell they are.
Yeah.
Because then it kind of hits you like, this is what's going on. Because when you're running, it's kind of just you and your thoughts. There's nothing else. You just start to think about things and get in that mindset of, you kind of start to critique yourself, but in a good way at times. It's really good thing to do, especially if you it's almost like taking that look in the mirror and seeing who you truly are and figuring out what's truly wrong. Now, the next step is to figure out what you're going to kind of do with those, how you're going to approach that. So like, what was your process of like approaching once you figured out that you had the problem? Did you just start running? Like, what all was it?
Man, I think that because of the anonymity thing, it's tough to get into, but I'll say this much. Running showed me that there was some deep mental, emotional work that needed to be done. And there are certain programs that have steps that you can follow to kind of work through those things. So I think a combination of that and then therapy for me was massive. Because there was a lot of shit that I just never wanted to look at again. And I buried it so deep, you know, I'd forgotten it was even there, to be honest with you. But like, just because you forget it consciously, subconsciously, it's still eating you alive because you're holding on to all this shit. And so, you know, for me, it was huge. It was like this program that I'm talking about in particular, like, you know, a lot of what it's about is acknowledging or addressing your truth and having to say it out loud. And I think that running got me to a place where it was like, I have to face this, right? Like, I have to face this thing, or it doesn't matter. Like, I'm going to end up back where I started. And so I'm a huge proponent of therapy. I'm a huge proponent of different programs and resources within sobriety. But all that's continued work. And I tell people that all the time. Like, you don't get sober and life turn into, sunshine and rainbows. Like, life will beat your ass, right? It will. And you can make some decisions that'll, put you up against a Mike Tyson in his prime versus like a Jake Paul in his prime. I would rather fight Jake Paul in his prime than Mike Tyson. But point being, like, you make better decisions, the fight's not quite as hard, right? If you make poor decisions, the fight's way shittier. And so for me, it's about trying to make the next right decision. And I still mess up, man. I messed up yesterday. I made a decision that's so far out of line morally with where I'm trying to head in my life. And dude, it ate me up. I didn't sleep good, but I woke up this morning and was like, okay, I made that decision. Nothing has followed through. Nothing's happened with it yet, but I need to correct this. And I corrected it. And that's what it's about, right? It's like, you're not going to be perfect. You're not going to make the right decisions all the time, every time. But when you messed up or you made the wrong decision, you got to own it and make it right. And I think that that's a massive part of recovery too, is like not letting anything build up. Like, if it can be dealt with right now, let's deal with it right now. So I feel like that was big for me too.
I think a lot of people, especially like men, are very hesitant towards and standoffish towards therapy, and it's for similar reasons like you talked about. We're just used to just burying it away, and we just think that at that point it disappears. But it truly only progress happens is when you start to say it out loud and you truly, discuss it with somebody. And maybe you don't have to go to your therapist. Maybe you do go to a friend at first and try that and talk to them. Now, I will say that a lot of people are fake friends. You'll come across a lot of those where you'll try and open up to them and it doesn't quite go the way you want it to. They kind of almost coddle you instead of truly trying to help you. And I'm not saying all friends are like that, but I really like that you talked about, you made a bad decision, but the fact is you recognized it and fixed it. We're all going to mess up in life. That is life. You're going to screw up all the time. But recognizing it and fixing it, or making sure it never happens again, or doing your damnedest to make sure it never happens again, is progress, is how it should go.
Yeah, for sure. We're on the same page, totally aligned with that. I think that I try to share that message too with anyone that I come across that's looking for guidance on their recovery, or I'm like, you're going to fuck up. Like, it's okay. As long as you don't drink or do dope today, like, we can fix this other shit. We can figure this out. But don't beat yourself to death over this other shit, right? Like, we can work through it. We can figure it out. And I think that that's big for people in recovery. I know it was big for me, was understanding that not every mistake was a fatal mistake, right? It wasn't the end. And I think that that's something that I've carried with me. I get asked all the time, like, so I'll have 4 years this July, but people, they ask me all the time, like, do you ever have urges, right? Or do you ever, like, does it cross your mind? Like, yeah, it does. And I think that's natural. I think there are stories where people, it's never popped back up for them. They've never wanted it or thought about it again. But I've definitely, like, my thoughts, within that kind of exist in the world of, like, Sunday football, all the fellas are together watching Sunday night football, and they're drinking a few beers and they're doing it, within, control environment. Like, they're good. They're not over drinking. They're not being crazy. I wish I could do that. That's where, like, that's the extent of it for me. It's like, man, I wish I could do that. And, truthfully, do I think that I could drink a few beers? Maybe, but I'm not willing to bet on it.
Is the risk worth the reward?
Much better place now than I've ever been in. But I know what it's like once you get on that dragon's back, dude, and you don't want to stop. And so there's a good chance. Like I always choose to, like, when I have those thoughts, I just play the tape forward. That's what I call it. Like I fast forward the tape till tomorrow and ask myself, like, well, how am I going to feel about this decision tomorrow? And the answer to that's really clear. So I've been able to stay away from it. I don't want to say easily, like I don't want to take a shot at anyone's recovery by using that word, but I've been blessed. But a big part of it for me is like, I'm not sitting around with my hands under my ass. Like I'm trying to build a business. I'm trying to do the podcast. I'm trying to train for an ultra marathon. I'm trying to be of service. And for me, that keeps me out of a lot of shit. And that's okay. Like, I think that, back to the running thing real quick, like when you go out for a run, like I know I'm in a good place mentally when I go out for a run and I start doing math. And I'll be like, okay, I got like 16.4 miles left. And then I'm like, okay, 16.37. And then I'll divide it by 4. And somehow I'll end up with like, 4.094. And like, I'm like doing that while I'm running. But I know if I'm doing that while I'm running, I'm good. Because it's just me. It's just my thoughts. And if the only thing that's in my brain when it's that is math, I'm in a good spot. But, you talked about being alone with yourself. Like, I do that. I do that all the time. I'm alone with myself. I don't do well running with people. People want to talk the whole time. Like, that ain't me, man. I ain't in that good a shape, first off. Like, I can trudge pretty damn far, but like, if you want to have a full-fledged conversation, we got to get breakfast. It ain't gonna be over a long run.
Yeah, when if I run at the gym on the treadmill, my girlfriend will come on the treadmill beside me and walk, and I'll be running, and she'll like try and talk, and I just put my finger up, and I'm like, not right now. Like, I cannot talk right now. Like, I am focused on how far I'm running, how much I got left, and everything like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's one of my favorite sayings on this podcast. I've said it so many times. I think I heard it in college, and it is, you'll learn more from your failures than you ever will your successes. And I think a lot of people fear failure and fear messing up and look at, all the mistakes they've made in your life. But in reality, it's more of a learning experience, a learning curve that you have to go through. We talked about, you're going to mess up, and it's not going to be perfect. Like you said, you just messed up yesterday. You're going to still make mistakes throughout your entire life. That's okay. Just figure out how to fix it and learn from it.
Yeah. I mean, and I said it earlier, I'm with you on that. Solid. Like, dude, my darkest moments, my lowest points, my biggest fuck ups are my greatest blessings. And it's because, like, I didn't let them become failures. Did something with it. Like, I hear people all the time, like, their addiction's too deep, or that guy, he's messed up too far. Like, there's no coming back. And why I say that is, like, dude, the deeper the addiction, the deeper the recovery. And your story is that much more impactful, because you're like, well, if I can do it, you can do it. You know what I mean? And the other benefit to, I think, dude, I've met so many different people in recovery, but a lot of the people you meet, like, I look up to them like they're superheroes, bro, because, like, if they can get through that and then figure out a way to put that energy into something positive, dude, watch out. You know what I mean? It's insane. It would blow people's mind if they knew how many millionaires in the United States are former addicts. Mm-hmm. And it's because they're willing to go all in, right? Like, they're like, okay, I've already been at this low. Like, a failed business, like, that's gonna break me. Like, no way. I'll fail 50 businesses. It still won't be that low. And I'll still keep coming back and fighting for more. And I think, like, we live in such a fear-based culture where it's like so afraid to make the next mistake or so afraid to fail that nobody's willing to try anything. And that's why I tell people all the time, like, if you've got if you've got any kind of drive at all right now in today's society and you want to build something and you just got a little bit of dog in you, you're going to be successful, because they're not wired that way anymore, man. Like the competitive nature of life just isn't the same. So, I tell people all the time, like, dude, if you can just get sober, your life is going to change drastically, because you're going to figure out something to apply all that energy to, and it's going to be tremendous. And I think that gives me a lot of hope. So I hope it gives them a lot of hope when we talk about it. But I can't remember where I was going with that, but that's where we're at.
Well, Trip, your story is definitely an inspiration, and I truly appreciate you coming on. Where can people find and follow you on, like, your social media and your podcast?
Wonderful. Yeah. So for a couple different things, website is adyatx.com. You can go on our website and pull up all the podcasts to date. And there's a subscribe link in there, so you can go straight to YouTube that way. You can also go to YouTube, Spotify, and Apple and search Ain't Dead Yet Podcast. It'll populate under all three of those. And then on Instagram, ADYATX. My personal page, if you want to check it out, is at @Ison_. But yeah, those are all our pages. And if you or anyone you know is struggling, put them in touch, man. I don't have all the answers, and I don't know what I can do for them, but I will do anything I can to get them the help they need. There's people out here that care. There's resources out here, and there's people that are willing to make people feel seen and heard. So if you're struggling, it doesn't matter. Drugs, alcohol, obesity, gambling, sex, relationship problems, mental, emotional, anything, reach out, get in touch with us. We'll do anything we can to help you out.
I will have all the links to that in the episode description. Trip, thank you. I appreciate you. But until next time, you guys know the deal. Life is hard, and it's going to knock you down just like a bull does to a bull rider. Don't let that bull of life walk all over you. Get up, grab the bull by the horns, and take control of your life. Roughnecks, out.